Thanks for showing up. I have a couple people virtually from the committee. I'll go down the roster here for Connie's benefit. Sandra.
Here.
Robin. Gary. Lori. Monica.
Yes.
Sarah. Present. Mike Brower. Here. Mike Kagi. Mike Kage is here. Keith? Here. Jason? Here. All right. Good attendance, I think. Probably be done by 11:30-ish. So get you guys back out to your day jobs or... Excuse me. Okay. Robin's here. I know Gary's traveling. He said he might try to tune in. Lori is ill, so. Well, let's jump right in. We'll entertain a motion for approval of the minutes.
This is Sandra, I'll second.
Sarah moves and Sandra seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye. Opposed, same sign. Passed unanimously. And Chris, who's joining us virtually, call upon you, Chris, to give us some updates from the AG's office and any remarks you might have for us.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a couple quick remarks on the AG's office before we jump into item number 4 on the agenda. The SB 307, which I think we've all discussed in the past, which was the allowing for-profit entities to be qualified grant recipients and the ability for the board to receive mileage and other expenses, did pass and was signed by the governor recently. So we have now started developing a process for you all to be able to get your reimbursement. It is retroactive through the first meeting of the year in January. So we're going to work with Connie and we're going to send you all a W-9 to get payment accounts set up on our side. So we'll need you to return that W-9 to us. And then we will walk through how to do the reimbursement form. You are entitled to mileage, subsistence assistance, and other expenses. You are not entitled to the per diem by the statute. So you'll get a form from us. You'll get some instructions from us on how to fill that out. And then if you have questions on how to do that process, how to fill that reimbursement process, we can work with our fiscal department to answer those specific questions, because the reimbursement will come from the AG's office. The other AG's update is that you should have all received your statement or the form for your statement of disclosures, your annual disclosures that you have to do. If you have not received that, please let Nancy know so that we can get you that. It would have come in the mail to you. So please do let us know if you have not received that. But just as a reminder, per the statute, you do have to submit a statement of substantial interests once every year, and so we should be hopefully getting through that process fairly soon.
Hey, Chris.
Other news from the AG's office, we do have some money on hand to transfer to Sunflower. Go ahead.
Someone had a question.
Hey, sorry, Chris, it's Monica.
Yes.
Did you say we should have received something in the mail?
Yes, you should have.
Okay, and who are we supposed to contact if we didn't? Did you say Nancy?
Yes, you can contact Nancy Deaver or myself, and we'll make certain another copy is sent to you.
Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
No, that's fine. And Monica, it may just be that we had a bad address for you on file, so we may have to update your address.
This is Jason. Based on the reactions around the room, nobody's received that yet.
So thanks for the heads up.
So could this be a collective? Let's let Nancy know that.
Yes. My understanding was they went out a couple of weeks ago. I will touch base with the person who was sending those out. That was coming out of our fiscal division. So I'll touch base with them and make certain that those actually did go out, and maybe I've just jumped the gun a little bit.
Be here by
But
November.
You all should be receiving that in the mail soon. If you don't by the next meeting, we'll make certain that's corrected. I might just have to print out copies for everybody and email other people copies of the form. So, but it shouldn't be very different from what you've done in years past. So just be aware that you're going to need to get that done soon.
I think you
Chris?
can access
Yes.
that online, and then it saves
Yeah.
your information from the previous year, so that maybe a link to that would be good too.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you couldn't maybe send it out electronically. Is there something prevents us from getting it electronically?
Not that I'm aware of. I just know that our fiscal folks were going to send it via mail, but I will touch base with them and see if we can do that electronically.
Excellent.
Thank you.
The other major update, just wanted to let you know, and this is really getting to point 4, but we do have some money to transfer to Sunflower. That money is currently on hold pending the outcome of the budget. So we are delaying those particular that transfer to Sunflower. But for our subdivisions, we do have some additional subdivision payments that should go out before the end of April. Those will be the last ones until the end of the fiscal year. Although I do think we will receive at least one more payment from the Janssen settlement before the end of the fiscal year. But just due to fiscal year and procedures, we wouldn't be able to do that distribution to our subdivisions until likely in the middle to late July. So without getting into the next point, those are the AG's updates outside of the legislative update. Any questions? Okay. Mr. Chair, if you were talking, I did not hear you. I think you might need to push the mic.
At the end of the meeting, I'll remember to push my button. No questions from the board, and let's move to item number 4, please.
Certainly. So item number 4 on the agenda is about the legislature's allocation. We talked about this briefly at the last meeting, that the legislature had allocated some money for fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25 to a particular entity known as Full Circle. Subsequent to that meeting and during floor debates in the House on the budget bill, the legislature also allocated $2.5 million to Valley Hope and $5 million to KDADS for providing or increasing indigent treatment services. We do not know if the governor is going to sign off on those or veto. We don't know what the process there is. So we won't know for certain whether or not those line items are actually going to become effective law until likely after the veto session, which will be right about the same time as our next meeting. But what I will tell you is that the budget provisos do make all of those expenditures subject to board review. At this stage, we are still trying in the AG's office to evaluate what that means. What is the scope of that review? Unfortunately, we don't have a final analysis yet to offer to the board. We will before any of those expenditures have to be presented to the board. The first one would be from the Attorney General's office for Full Circle as directed by the legislature. But we are determining what the scope of that for review actually means. What powers does that give the board? Who would actually be bound by board decisions? Those sorts of things. So I'm willing to accept questions on this, and I will try to answer everything I can, just knowing that there are still some unknowns that are pending about these particular budget provisos.
Thanks, Chris. I might interject before we take some questions. So having been in the legislature when the tobacco monies first came in, the tobacco settlement, different times, tight budgets and all of that. And so the tobacco settlement money became a target of the legislature for many years, maybe even today. So we tried to, in the legislation that enabled this board and to protect the opioid money as best we could, the term would be, in a lockbox. But always knew in the legislature, or after I'd been around a while, that somebody had a key to that lockbox. And even though we had thought we had this protected from things like this, and I'm not saying it's bad or good, it's the prerogative of the legislature. They got the power of the purse. But anyway, they taken on the prerogative to include a couple of items in their budget, and I know the AG's office has been in discussion with the legislature and the governor's office and seeing how this will all play out. And then at our next meeting, we'll have more clarity in how it works. So it's not, it doesn't, it surprises me a little bit, doesn't shock me, because I always knew that they had the power of the purse, so to speak. So anyway, that's just a little background on that, if anybody that hasn't been around the legislative process. So I will open it up for questions for Chris.
Hey, Chris, this is Sandra. Can you say again, I want to be sure I heard this correctly, Full Circle, KDADS, and Valley Hope, is that right?
Yes, those are the three entities.
The amounts of money again were what?
So KDADS was $5 million, Valley Hope was $2.5 million, and Full Circle is roughly, it has very specific dollar amounts. I don't have that right in front of me, but it's about $47,000 for fiscal year 24 and $180,000 for fiscal year 25.
All right, thanks for the clarification.
Yep.
Hey, Chris, it's Monica. I'm gonna look really dumb here, and I'm okay with it. You're saying that during the legislative session, out of a committee, they spent the settlement dollars.
I would use the word allocated, but yes, and it was both out of a committee and during the floor debate in the House. They allocated these dollars. The Valley Hope portion and the KDADS portion did not have a committee discussion.
So I'm going to make this statement, and this would be when my mother would say, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. But, as a person who has been involved in the children's cabinet funding since at the local level, and now as a member of the children's cabinet, this is a huge looming issue that is all, as Pat described it, has always been there. And it's not cool, friends. It's just simply not cool when you have an organized group of people with a concerted effort, articulated plan, and clear and concise ways of allocating money or assigning money. We don't allocate. It's not cool. And I hope, as a new body, right, and fresh out of the lane, that Pat's right, we don't really have any say in the end, but going outside of this process is not strategic in any way, shape, or form. And I hope that if we ever have the opportunity as a body to continue to say we want the funds to stay right here, that we do it, and we do it in a way that it gets to the right folks. Now, the problem is those folks change every 2 or 4 years, right? But you're basically saying they've spent what we've spent, and we spent a year figuring out who to give it to.
Yeah, the legislature has allocated roughly $8 million. And I believe last year we did 10.2, something to that effect.
And with a lot of thoughtfulness, a lot of fairness to communities in Kansas, and a lot of strategic thinking about a once in a lifetime set of dollars that we can invest. So with that, I'll jump down here in my kitchen off my soapbox, and thanks for listening.
Other
Monica,
questions?
this is Robin. I
Comments?
absolutely am on the soapbox with you. It is unfair. It feels so wrong to have created this body, and we're now well into our second year in figuring out how to do this in a really productive and constructive way to make a huge difference in our state. For them to come in and basically just take money seems very unfair. So do we have any ability to know what the funds are being used for at these three organizations?
So that is what we are trying to determine the scope of for review. One of the discussions we had with the revisor's office was the importance for the board to have oversight over the expenditures, about how the board process has built oversight into those expenditures. My understanding was that that was part of the intent of the amendments to the budget reviso, was to make certain the board still had that oversight authority. However, I cannot say at this time what the scope of for review means. And I hope you understand, I'm trying to pick my words very carefully here. I do not know what for review means at this time. We are going to make an analysis and determine what that scope of authority the board has over those expenditures, and hopefully have that ready to present to you come May.
I
Chris?
don't see my next comment to punish in any way those three organizations, but we definitely need to remember how much money these three organizations got as we go into the next RFP process.
And you absolutely have that authority under the statutory scheme to consider how much money any particular organization receives from other opioid sources or from other sources in general.
Okay,
Chris,
like
this is-
Monica, I'll get off my soapbox now.
Sarah?
Chris, this is Sarah. Just as a point of clarification, you did indicate that two of these entities that are receiving or have been allocated funds did not have a hearing on these requests. Is that correct? So no public discussion. So
There
none.
was brief discussion in the floor debate. There was, I think, two representatives discussed very, very briefly the KDADS and Valley Hope expenditures, but to my understanding, there was no prior hearing that vetted those particular expenditures. My understanding on the full circle expenditures, those came out of committee, but I can't tell you with certainty whether or not they were in a hearing or if that was just out of committee work in general.
Chris, this is Robert. I watched the hearing, and it was an amendment brought by one of the representatives. It was discussed for about 2 minutes, and there wasn't like a grant proposal review or anything like that. It was just a discussion that the entity had failed to receive a grant from this board and one of the previous RFPs, and had sought assistance from the legislature as a result.
Could someone let us know what committee that actually was in? Because those committee hearings are certainly available for us to watch.
I believe it was House Commerce, Chris, was that, or appropriation?
And I thought it was an appropriations subcommittee. And I thought it was an appropriations subcommittee. Robin, if you wouldn't.
You thought it was a pro?
That sounds right. I can find the date for you and let you know.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And which legislator brought that amendment?
It was Representative Tarwater.
Thank you.
For the full circle amendment, it was Representative Landwehr for the other two.
That's actually kind of scary because it sets a precedent that if you didn't get money from us, go around us to your favorite legislator and you'll get it that way.
Chris, could you please and Chris, aren't you glad you brought this up? Aren't you glad you're the carrier of this information? You know we love you, Chris, right? Chris, could you restate, now that you've got my attention, could you restate what the KDADS funds were for? You said indigent?
Yes, let me give me just 1 second to pull up the exact language, but the KDADS funding was meant to set up essentially a grant program within KDADS to do treatment facilities for indigent populations in the state. Let me get you the exact language.
And do that for 5 million? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Would that run? I'm sorry, Chris, I'm just asking all kinds of questions now. I can go
You are
back and
totally
watch
fine.
it myself. Would that run through the safety net system, or was that articulated? Too much detail, probably.
I do not believe, Krista, I think you also track this. I don't believe that that was articulated. So here is the exact text. It was for the Indigent Support Fund. So it was expenditures shall be made for the Indigent Support Fund for providing support to the substance use disorder providers who provide services to individuals who have no insurance or other medical coverage, provided that the above agency shall develop guidelines for providers to apply for the funds and establish a review team for the application for the funds to determine that such funds are being appropriately used, and provided that they make the expenditure request to the board, subject for the board's review.
So this is Sandra. Again, aren't you glad you brought this up? So I guess this is a little bit of PTSD about the gaming fund as well, like real similar scenario. And I'm going to be really looking forward to what opportunities do we have as a board within the statute that binds our activity to have conversations with folks to really understand what the intent of the proviso was. I mean, I'm going to try to be really professional here. Because what you just described, Chris, about the purpose of the KDAD's money, which may be a valuable purpose, I'm not questioning that, there is a process for that currently. And so I'm curious, and it makes me cautious about how we allocate funds in the future and the commitments we make to communities.
One of the things I will point out about that particular funding, we have not had this discussion with KDADS, but you are welcome to, as part of your consulting with relevant stakeholders, power in the enabling statute for the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board, you're welcome to discuss with KDADS whether or not the correct way to implement that particular budget line item is to have the board be the entity that does that grant making process through our board traditional grant making process. If the proviso is not so limited that KDADS couldn't charge the board with that particular duty if that was something KDADS chose to do. But that's a conversation the board would need to have with KDADS about how KDADS would want to implement that particular set of requirements from that particular proviso.
Was that request in the governor's budget or KDAD's budget initially and then removed through the appropriations process, then put back in? Or was this just something at the very end?
My understanding was that this was not in the governor's budget, but I would have to double check the governor's original budget to tell you that with certainty.
Thanks, Chris.
So this
Forgive
is
me, I am not I'm not quite as equipped as KLRD at making these sorts of quick, knowledgeable choices or statements. One thing I will tell you, just for the board's own knowledge, the Valley Hope piece, the expenditures are specifically to be it's for infrastructure to expand Valley Hope located in Atchison, Kansas. That is the extent of the budget proviso direction.
Okay, I'm back on my box. I can't get off of it quite yet. So the budget has not been approved.
Not yet.
That will happen in the end of April, right? And so if we were as a board to make a statement or a comment, we would need to do that prior to our next meeting, because that once they come back to omnibus, it's done, it's over, right?
Yes.
Okay, so, I think everybody knows how I feel, and I feel like something does need to be said because of our newness and because of establishing our process and our plan. And out of respect to us as a group, I mean, again, those three entities, great. Those three concepts, great. It's not that at all. It's the process and knowing what happened with the Children's Cabinet Fund and what continues to happen every year, and the uncertainty that puts on local programs, it to me is something that needs to be addressed. And Sandra, I didn't even think about gambling fund, but you are absolutely right. You are absolutely right. So, Mr. Chair, I'll leave it to you, but
I
I
was
think that
going
newness.
to propose that we come up with the statement after we get through with commenting here, and I forgot about the gambling fund myself, even though Representative Roth and myself were the ones that, because we held out the two passing votes well, just full disclosure that it wasn't going to pass unless they had that. It was supposed to be 3%, and then it's been hijacked, and I didn't know exactly where it stood at. But anyway, we can develop a statement before we leave here and make sure the legislature and the governor's office knows, because of the precedent, and all three entities that are asking, we probably all, in full disclosure, I'm a patient of Valley Hope and I worked at Valley Hope, but all of this was a surprise to me when I heard it. I had a couple of legislators ask me over the last few months, about our committee and our board. And, I told them that we have a real, we've developed a stringent review process, and, we take our job seriously. And again, I thought we had it protected just because of some steps that we put it in there. But again, it's the prerogative of the legislature, but it hasn't crossed the goal line. So maybe we can stop them at the 1 yard line. It's bad enough the amount of money this year, but as people have talked about other funds, it's the precedent that it sets for years to come. And plus, we're all doing this because of our wanting to help alcoholics and addicts. And, we all have lots of things we could be doing. So if what we're doing is not paid attention to or subverted in some form and fashion, it just, to me, it's like, well, why show up here? Mike?
So Chris, a bit of a tongue-in-cheek question for you, because I think I know the answer, but in this scenario, should possibly legally be able to continue for subsequent years, does the board have, our board here, do we have the ability to hire our own lobbyists? Is that what it could come to? So that, because I'm assuming to some extent, these three organizations were able to lobby the legislature when the board was not. So that's one point. I suspect we can't use opioid settlement funds to do that. But I did, I said that's a question that's worth being asked.
Yeah, I think that would probably be an unallowable expense for opioid expenditure funds that isn't really going towards abatement purposes, although indirectly it really is to try to preserve the ability of the board to do abatement work. I think generally at the national level, that would be considered a non-allowable expense. As for statutory authority, I might turn that over to Robert. I don't think there is anything in the statute that would empower the board to hire its own lobbyist, but I may be thinking of this in more restricted terms, and I might let Robert comment.
Thank you, Robert.
Chris, I was really hoping you weren't going to say that. Pulled up the act just in anticipation, and I will keep looking through it, but so far I don't see an explicit authority to do that, nor do I see a source of funds for the board outside of what we get from the settlement and pass out. So that's a separate problem, is that even if theoretically you could do it in some way, if you can't do it with grant money because it would violate national protocols, you can't do it. But I will look further into that to see if that's an option.
Would
But my
interest
memory
earned,
of this, oh, go ahead.
would interest earned be considered grant money?
Under the statute, I believe that's considered grant money. Yes, under the settlements, the idea of that interest earned would be going towards administrative expenses typically, but I believe under our statute, that's all considered money that has to be used for grant making purposes. Those are all basically under the Kansas Fights Addiction Fund, or under the purview there, and the board's ability to distribute funds is limited to the ability to distribute grants for abatement purposes.
So my second point is, and in light of this information, in light of pending further clarification from the Attorney General's office regarding the board's authority versus the legislature's authority to allocate this money, I think that needs to be clarified. And I understand that you're in the process of doing that, Chris. But I think we almost need to table agenda items 5 and 6 from today's agenda, because in the RAS issues in here, without having time to think this through, my thought is for future legislative sessions, if we spend all the money first, there's nothing for them to allocate. And so that would strategically significantly change the direction that we've been discussing as a board. However, I do think that is in the best interests of the state of Kansas, rather than letting year after year legislatures in a 2-minute discussion allocate our funds.
Well, and that's a great thought, but there's, I don't know if we can bind future income from the settlement, and that's where, you know, we thought the money was, you know, in a bank that couldn't be accessed, but there's the transfer. And I think that's where, because I looked into that thinking, well, I thought we had it locked up, but it's the transfer going from the, you know, the claimants or plaintiffs, whatever the right term is, you know, it goes to the AG's budget, and then it gets transferred from the AG's budget to wherever Sunflower puts it. So that's a great idea. So I know that Chris and the AG's office are, you know, maybe not daily, but looking into different ways. The ideal about a lobbyist, I hadn't thought of that, but I tell you what we could do, which having been on the other side, that at least as effective and not more effective, is that just we as an organized group, wouldn't have to be all of us, but you know, whomever would ask for time in the committees. You know, the two that first come to mind would be the Ways and Means in the Senate and the Appropriations Committee in the House, and try to get in front of them the first week of the session next year, if there's not too much to do other than us getting a letter, you know, stating our position for this year before the omnibus bill gets passed. So talking out loud, but thinking from my experience here, that would probably be as effective, particularly because we represent, you know, a lot of what goes on here in Kansas, and I think that they would listen to us, and even some private conversations with some of the key legislative team, I think would go a long ways, because, you know, for whatever reason, you know, they propose this, it wasn't nefarious, is that the right word? But it's outside of our scope. Again, you know, we spent quite a bit of time thinking about how to set up a board that could be fair to all the constituents of Kansas, and we represent, a lot of vast amount of experience and wisdom, so I think we need to make that known right away, but then also look for the next legislative session to, I guess, lobby on behalf of ourselves. I don't think there's anything that would prevent us from doing that.
Advocacy is never illegal. Advocacy is never illegal. Lobbying can be illegal, but advocacy never is.
There you go.
I do also think for, moving forward in this conversation, a letter to the entire Appropriations Committee and Ways and Means Committee, but specifically conversations with the folks that are on Conference Committee on that. I don't think they'll, I don't think any of it'll do any good, quite honestly, but I think it needs to be done. And I think we need to reach out to the governor's office because she can line item veto these items, I believe, right? Or are they in a Conference Committee report, Chris?
They are in a conference committee report, but I don't think that would prevent them from being line itemed on this particular budget, but I don't know that answer specifically, since this is this is the budget bill that they're working. So my understanding is she has the ability to line item these.
So that may be a
My
strategy.
understanding as well.
Okay. And again, not because they're not good programs or not
Right.
good ideas. It's the process.
I mentioned something about a statement. I'm not I didn't pay attention in English class. Is somebody a good writer that could be working on a statement?
I wonder if we might just want to have a statement maybe drafted outside of the meeting and then, yeah.
Maybe
and then
Sunflower
it's
can
sent.
help us with that as I say that and go on mute from 2 hours away. That'd be real.
I just want to chime in before you start planning on it. Any process in developing that needs to be done in mind of the Kansas Open Meetings Act. So there can't be deliberation amongst either a majority of the board itself or any designated subcommittee. So you could set a staff person or a central points of contact to collect edits and ideas from multiple board members who can then consolidate it and send it back out. And that would be my preferred process, so I don't light my hair on fire.
And even if
don't,
you do, I think that's a great idea. Not the hair on fire thing. I don't suggest that.
Not that Krista needs something else to do, but why don't we, if you have,
Well, 911.
a proposed statement, send it to Krista, and then we'll just plan on doing a quick Zoom here in a week or thereabouts, and we can put together the final version and approve it, and then we can distribute it in the fashion that has been mentioned.
It might not, and I don't know how this works, but it might not hurt for us to have, there are, the Appropriations Commission, or Committee is huge. And certainly not one person on this committee could talk to all those individuals and have those conversations and concerns. But it might not hurt for us to have kind of almost like a media card of information, just kind of points we don't want to miss when having conversations with those that represent us in the House and Senate. So I don't.
Let's develop that too, and again,
Yes.
Krista can collect those. That's a great idea,
The
because
highlights.
again, try to cover a lot of territory, but not, they are busy guys, and especially this time of year. The conference committee, of course, would consist of leadership from both parties, so they for sure need to be contacted. And then anybody that would, if you live not if you live, whoever represents you in your district, obviously seems like they pay more attention to their own constituents. So you can, if you don't know, it's easy to figure out who the representatives and senators are from the area that you live in or work in. Well, we could send a letter to the full committees, but I think the outreach, just again, drawing upon my experience, what would be most effective is if, Sarah's point, if we just kind of divide and conquer and contact, if there's some appropriations, I think has 17 or 21 members, and the Senate is a little less than that, but there might be several of those members that would be in your district, and you could reach out to them.
Yeah, appropriations has 24. Ways and Means has 1, 2, 9, 8 or 9, something like that.
Just as
Certainly.
a point on timing, the budget bill, to my knowledge, it's SB 28, I believe, is what they've put it into. Does not appear to have been presented to the governor yet. It was approved last Friday. So they have a handful of days left to present it to the governor, which would then set that 10-day clock for the governor to sign or veto. If you are intending to give a letter to the governor about the board's positions, just to encourage you, you probably have about a week before that would not be particularly effective any further. So just to encourage the board on timing, I think it would probably make sense to have something ready to go, if not by next Friday, the Monday following.
Chris, I'm not
Robert.
drawing excuse me, sorry. I'm not drawing the correlation between what you just said. Senate Bill 28 is the one about,
Yeah, I just saw it too.
remind me which one 28 is?
Senate Bill 28 was a bill about group funded insurance, but I believe they put the budget actually in that bill. That was the one they were using
The shall it be
as the
used.
vehicle for the budget negotiations.
I'm sorry, I thought that, what was the number of the one about the kind of the cleanup bill on that we can fund for-profits and mileage?
That was Senate Bill 307.
307, thank you.
So we'll develop statements, whomever wants to, and also some talking points, get those to Krista. I would suggest a week from today that we schedule a Zoom meeting and finalize those and get them out there. As Chris said, the budget, which is not unusual, it usually takes a while just for the revisers for it to be reviewed and look for any technical errors. And then the governor will have 10 days once it's laid on her desk. So if we could get something out by next Friday, looking around, would people have time to, whatever, 9 o'clock next Friday or sometime on Friday? And we can just plan on doing it via Zoom. And then during that time, of course, if there's any updates from the AG's office, I could get those to Connie to disseminate to all of us too, if there's some other piece of information.
Chair George, I wonder if, because of just considering the timing, and if we meet on Friday, and I'm not sure it can be delivered by Friday, and I'm not sure if anybody will read it by Friday, but is it possible that as the committee could ask the chair to reach out to the governor's office expressing our initial concern?
Sure.
Okay.
Either myself or Monica.
Doesn't hurt for both of you.
And, yeah.
Just to let them know that an official statement of concern is coming that way, but just to kind of give them some notice that we have concern, and we're going to outline that in a letter.
Sure. Be glad to.
So did anyone from KDADS reach out to Sunflower, anyone at Sunflower about this before making this request of the legislature?
Yeah, well, I talked to them after we learned about it, and it did not initiate through KDADS. They didn't request it specifically themselves.
Any further questions or comments? I think we've covered a lot, and we'll have more, I'm sure, at our meeting next week.
So this is Sandra. So are we scheduling for next Friday at 9?
Let's do. What would everybody, if you got a chance, let's look at my calendar for next Friday. Yeah. And we'll just plan on doing.
You worried about notice?
Yeah, I'm assuming that most of us will, if not all of us, will.
Could I suggest an 8:30 call?
Can you say that again?
19th,
Could I suggest an 8:30 call?
8:30 for me.
Oh.
That worked for.
I can join at 8:40, but I have an 8:30 call.
Do I have
Sorry.
8:50? Once.
8:45. Can we go 8:45, please?
8:45 on Friday the 19th.
This is just
WebEx.
30 minutes an hour max.
Yeah, 30 minutes
Review.
max.
Review statement.
Okay.
Just for
And Connie and Krista, if you receive statements, I'm looking at Bob, I guess, here, that if she collects and then would send out to the committee, or Connie could send out, here's proposed
Yeah.
statement.
Yeah, I mean, Connie can send out a proposed statement as long as there's not deliberation back and forth or an attempt to communicate with one another through an intermediary, but it's just a collection, consolidation, redistribution, that's fine.
Okay. All right, we got a plan.
Mr. Chair, we will have Nancy, since this has to be an open meeting, we'll have Nancy send out a notice about the meeting as well to our mailing list. And Krista, is there any way we could use the Sunflower Conference Room as the open meeting space?
I haven't checked the calendar for Sunflower, but Connie did say we could meet here in this room.
Okay, good. Then we will set that as the open meeting location.
All right, well.
Mr. Chair, I did have one last thing to just let the board know about this particular set of provisos. The AG's office did send a letter to various members of the different the conferees on the budget, as well as I believe the Appropriates and Ways and Means committees, about the KFAB dollars, about the opioids process. It was coming from the AG's office. It would probably be more impactful coming from the board. But I will share with Connie to share with the board the content of that letter so that you all can know what we've already advised the legislature from the AG's perspective.
Great. Well, thank you for the lively discussion, and more will be revealed. Somebody did mention, and I actually had that in mind, and I know Chris and I talked some about, in light of this, it's hard to spend money if you don't know how much you got. So items 5 and 6, maybe just kind of generally, and they are, kind of piggybacked on the RFPs that we already done. But my suggestion would be that we would table those until our next meeting, just to be, know where we're at. So Krista?
Yeah, I think for number 6, sure. Number 5 is just update on our current grantees, and I have a few budget modification requests. No additional dollars or anything, but they want to change their budgets to run by you all and update on progress reports and needs assessment. But that's already things that are already funded and already happening on item 5.
Well, let's go ahead and move into 5, and then we'll talk about on 6 if we're going to table or where we want to go.
Chair George, before we move on, I do think it's important that we need to include some kind of language in the letter that we are going to develop, that because of the choices that have been made, that we are having to stop our process and we're unable to move forward on granting and helping other Kansans out with their recovery, because we're having to shift.
Yeah, the uncertainty.
Right. And that's punitive to Kansans.
All right, Krista, you want to outline?
Yeah, okay. So current grantees and also updates. So last week, Alyssa and I attended the National RX Summit, so the national convening of opioid, stakeholders. They also focus on stimulant and other illicit drugs, but it's primarily focused on opioids. They've been doing it for many years, and so that was good. And then this week, I attended the Naloxone Saturation Policy Academy with KDADS, KDHE, DECA, our person with lived experience, Seth Dewey in Reno County, who's officially with MIR now, which is exciting. And then our public health analyst from the CDC Foundation, DJ. I think that was all that was with us, but it was a group of stakeholders from Kansas that are associated with naloxone and looking at that at the state level. And so we went through this policy academy that SAMHSA held for 10 different states that applied, and KDADS had applied, and we were awarded, and so that was this week. And so it was really looking at how do we fully saturate our state with naloxone, and looking at the data collection and whatnot, and how for the KFA's purposes can report data in a similar way to the statewide program and other entities, so that we can see where naloxone is actually going in the state and different zip codes and whatnot, so that kind of a state plan around that can be developed. And so those initial conversations with the key folks in the state. So it was good too. And we learned a lot of information as well as kind of educational along with the strategic planning kind of component, which is cool. Any questions on that before I jump into progress reports? Okay, pretty straightforward. Cool. Okay, so progress reports. So the first big chunk of progress reports for the treatment grantees were due on the 31st. We've received 32 out of the 35 that were due. We're working on getting those last 3. And then you all should be able to see that in your portal now. You should be able to see the progress reports that are approved. And so as those get approved through our system, so it goes through a first review with Kelly, our grants and finance manager, and then I do a review and approve it, and that's when I think it moves into your portal. But I think you should have several in there already to see if you want to look at those. And then prevention is due on April 30th. And the ones that we've received so far, we've had several payment delays. So as we talked about at the beginning, if grantees hadn't spent a lot of their funds, Kelly was going to reach out to them and talk about a delayed payment schedule so that they're not getting, way too many funds that they can't spend. And so there were 10 out of the 33 that are likely going to be on a delayed payment schedule, but Kelly and I are working with them if it may not necessarily be needed. There's some that are planning expenditures or maybe just haven't received an invoice. So it looks like they haven't spent a lot, but technically they've already started the work and it just hasn't processed. So it's not all there, but there were 10 that were pretty, we're still in conversations about that or have already moved to a payment delay. So that's the update on those. And then I'll have more updates, of course, as we get the prevention progress reports that are due on April 30th. So we'll have a good chunk after that for both RFPs. And then we did have 3 grantees that requested a budget modification. We had the 31st Judicial District request their drug court. They were awarded a SAMHSA grant that they applied for with similar strategies to what they applied to KFA for. And so they were hoping that they might be able to revise their KFA budget, which is probably a lot easier than a SAMHSA grant modifying that. And so they've requested that they're not necessarily moving much around in their categories, but they want to allocate it towards something different. And so instead of their contracts or the contractual services for treatment, recovery, housing, and HIV testing, they'd like to change that to contractual services for medical, dental, and optical services, as well as housing and utility assistance for their drug courts participants. And then changing their supplies, it wouldn't include UA cups, sweat patches, or gloves, but rather eyeglasses and medicine not covered by insurance. And they'd like to utilize a small portion of this money for costs related to supplies for graduation ceremonies and possible graduate incentives. And so they're moving, I don't think they have a specific designated amount of what that would be, since they're not changing from category to category. It would just be different items within that category, as we mentioned. So any questions or?
Let's see, when we did this before, we need to approve. Entertain a motion for approval as submitted.
This is Jason, so moved.
Second by Mike.
Any further discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Unanimous.
Great, thank you. The next one is Heartland Community Health Center. They're requesting to move $22,830 of their supplies line that they had $118,000 in. They have the MAT and SUD pharmaceuticals to be used by the pharmacy equipment to store and dispense MAT and SUD-related medications. The new expense would purchase 2 Icon med dispensers that would support safer, more accurate medication dispensing. The icons will provide support for pill count validation, partial prescription dispensing, and improve reporting and accountability. So the requests are part of an effort to expand their River City pharmacy dispensing services at the Heartland Community Health Center to provide increased access to safe, accurate, and timely dispensing of medications used to fill MAT prescriptions. It won't only assist their pharmacy staff with the ability to accurately fill medication MAT medications quickly, but the dispensing information is also stored on the patient's profile to aid in the medication adherence while reducing the potential for abuse of the medication. And in order to be able to stock and offer controlled substance medications for MAT, the pharmacy has several inventory requirements from the State Board of Pharmacy and the DEA. So this assists their pharmacy staff in meeting those regulations and with inventory double counts and at each fill, and the data and record keeping functions that it provides. And it will help them maintain a controlled substance inventory that's in compliance with all controlled substance acts and regulations from state and federal. So they're proposing to move that $22,830 from supplies to, in their budget modification, they moved it to equipment, but it sounds like it's a capital expenditure, so we'd ask them to move that to capital, but otherwise the information would be the same. We would just have them put it under that line instead of equipment.
Questions for Krista? Entertain a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Keith, second by
Sarah will second.
Sarah. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed, same sign? All right, unanimous.
Great. Okay, and this third one might be require a little bit more discussion, because I asked Chris, he wasn't quite sure if it would be allowable or not, but to ask you all for this one too. So it comes from KBI. Originally, they were awarded $20,000 in their budget to purchase KBI computers for several KHP troopers that were going to be assigned to KBI for their joint fentanyl impact team. Since that time, KHP has recalled their troopers for other duties, leaving that $20,000 unspent. They'd like to move all $20,000 from their supplies line to capital, which would change their budget to entirely be capital. It was $90,000 was already in capital, and they just had this $20,000 that was for these computers, and so now it would all be $110,000 under capital. So they've identified that they are in need of plotter printers in all three regions to better assist the crime analysts in their efforts to show timelines and flowcharts while working on complex multi-jurisdictional narcotics cases. The plotter printers would allow for agents working cases to better understand the flow and connections between targets that are connected in multiple locations, as well as be used in charts for the purpose of prosecution. The printers are capable of printing up to 44 inches tall and as long as needed and the paper's on spools. So it's like a massive printing of data. They're seeking approval of this $20,000 to purchase 3 of those plotter printers, ink and paper, instead of the computers that they were originally awarded funding for. The quote that they sent over to me is actually $20,550.40, so it's actually $550.40 over what they would have, so I would assume they'd have to cover that on their own because they wouldn't be reimbursed for that piece. They didn't cover that necessarily in their request, but obviously they're requesting $20,000 change, not any additional dollars, which their estimate might be a little over.
Questions?
Krista, their original proposal and allocation, was that all for the officers dedicated to fentanyl?
For this 20,000?
Well, for their entire,
Oh, the rest. No, the rest was all capital as well. So they had a overdose investigation for the scene, a laser scanner for the scene of overdoses, and a ventilation hood for one of their forensic labs. So those were the capital costs. There were $90,000 in capitals, and then there were $20,000 for these computers, which now they're wanting to reallocate to printers, which would be another capital cost.
Was that a prevention grant or a treatment grant?
That was under prevention. That was one that was reduced. They originally had applied for $200,000, but then there were things taken out during discussion based on allowability and whatnot.
Other questions?
Well, okay, I do. The plotter printers are utilized for, I'm trying to figure out how that's prevention. How is a printer, it's what's going to be used to develop some kind of court case, how is that prevention? Somebody help me out, please.
That's a good question. I didn't get any additional information. Chris, would you have anything to add to that piece?
I don't think I have a way to answer that question without speaking on behalf of the KBI on how a printer is going to be prevention. I think that the reason we wanted to leave this one up to the board is because this is a difficult decision. In theory, there are ways that this could be viewed as prevention, as in the form of like data science or something to that effect. But I think that this is probably within the sound discretion on the board if you think this is adequately tailored to prevention, or if it is not and is not an expense you want to allow.
Other comments?
Thank you, Chair. It's Mike Brower. So just in my own work with a couple of different counties, we do this kind of analysis based on GIS information, and I haven't seen it printed off in paper in like 20 years. So, and not to say that's not the proper approach in certain areas of the state. I don't have that kind of depth of knowledge, but it I don't know, it just seems interesting to me. But given that, though, I'm not inclined to make a big deal out of a $20,000 request. I think my personal approach may be for any potential requests or solicitations for next year to just not forget these type of changes, approaches. So.
Well, I'm interested in opinions on your last statement, just from the group, because my thought was that this may be a time where we need more information based on what Sarah's saying. Is tell us a little bit more about how this fits in with the original grant piece, as opposed to just shifting a budget item to something that we don't want to buy ourselves. It may not be that at all. So it was just maybe a more information type of.
Why don't we seek, we could either look at this on week from now, if we just get some clarification, you could put that in, or next month when we get together. It's $20,000, so I'm agree with Mike, it's $20,000, it's not that big a deal, but also to Jason's point, well, if we're just buying printers that they had in their other budget and freeing up $20,000, so it's not a big deal, but just to get some clarification, that would be helpful.
Yeah, and just in response to that question, this is Mike Brower for those of you online. You know, in Johnson County, where I happen to work, we take this same type of information the KBI is talking about. We have, for the last decade, looked at charged drug crimes based by geolocation within our county. That leads to decisions around allocation of law enforcement resources. And we have noticed for ourselves in the last 4 years that the hotspot, if you will, has become incredibly pinpointed on kind of a cross-section of major street and highway in Johnson County. And so, and we're just having this discussion in the last 2 weeks. And so we have asked our GIS department to narrow that information down even more, so they can get very down to the block on that information. We're pulling together a meeting with the 2 law enforcement agencies that service that area, along with a couple of our providers, and we'll be developing some possible solutions for prevention in the future. So I very much can see how this makes sense. We just put it up on a big screen, though, on a computer. We don't print off on plotter printers. So that's. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be. You know, get us some more information. Let's just, I feel like we'll table this request and.
Is this a time, I guess maybe we should ask, is this a time-sensitive request? I mean, does the KBI feel like that they need this approved today?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
And I can gather more information, have it prepared for the May meeting.
Let's do that. I'm going to request a 5-minute break. So.
Are we going to air out the room a little bit?
And number 6 was, oh, excuse me. Oh, okay. Go right ahead.
Just mentioning we needed a needs assessment update from Alyssa, which she was sad that I reminded that we skipped over. So here's Alyssa. Yes. Needs assessment from Alyssa.
Yes, thank you, Krista. So I have some really great updates to provide. At any point, feel free to ask questions or wait till the end, whatever works best. So currently, project is ongoing. Right now, Krista and I are meeting every other week with CPPR's staff central to the project to discuss short-term goals to make sure that we're really staying in line with that collaboration. And then every 6 weeks, Krista, Brandon, and I are doing what we're calling long-form meetings that are just longer strategy-based planning with CPPR's core team to really ensure that long-term we're keeping all the pieces going. They have submitted one of their interim reports outlining current work to date. The focus right now is really primarily on continuing to map the SCD ecosystem to be able to answer that question for the board, where are things happening and who is doing them? We're also looking into innovative work happening across the US, so being able to identify those innovative, effective strategies, not only happening in Kansas, but elsewhere that maybe can be adapted for Kansas. And then they are beginning to complete key informant interviews and focus groups. And so that's just another component of their engagement strategies that they will be collecting and that will be provided in a report to Sunflower. I have an update on the accountability cohort. I mentioned a few meetings back. So just a reminder, that group is comprised of people with lived and living experience with the goal in mind that as a cohort, they will be meeting multiple times throughout the remaining year to provide input on information that has been gathered and to help with strategic planning around really what is needed and to provide their specific viewpoint on their own navigation of the ecosystem. They will be compensated for their participation. And so CPPR is planning on sending out those invitations in the coming weeks and identifying the first meeting that they will be having, hopefully within the month. The bigger update I have is for the Community Futures Tour I spoke to last meeting. So again, these events were designed to be a mix of documenting concerns and experiences while focusing on looking to the future of what people think and ideally would like the future system to look like. I attended 9 of the 10 places. We had 2 meetings happen at the same time where I would have been at all of them. And they were genuinely really great. We were able not only, so the format of the sessions themselves were focused on, first off, understanding that currently everyone who's doing this work is really invested in it and is currently experiencing just a burden and a very large, heavy burden. And so asking them, what are the barriers you're experiencing? What is it that you're seeing that isn't working well? Tell us about them. Let us document them, you know, at that state perspective, but then also getting really local, like in your specific community, what is it that is a common barrier? And then we ask them to identify the really great things that are happening, which is personally my favorite part because I know that from my own experience in this area, there's a lot of really great work happening in the state. And so we kind of gave them what I like to say is the time to brag. I'm like, tell me about anything and everything that is working well for you and that you see being really great. And primarily the majority of the session then was spent asking them, okay, if you were able to look at 16 years forward when these KFA dollars have been invested and there is that strategy and this vision behind it, what would you envision the system looking like? And asking them to get really specific, what type of prevention are you seeing? What type of treatments? What is it that, I always liked when I was helping out with the sessions asking, what is it maybe today that you wish to see continue in 16 years? Or maybe what are those ideas that you're just having in your organizations or with your partners that in 16 years you hope are fully fleshed out? So across all the 10 communities we went to, we also did a virtual option. We collected information, we took notes. CPPR is currently consolidating those and looking for the bigger themes across the 3 major areas to help us really understand where those common threads are. And at the same time, at each location, we did allow for people to leave their contact information if they would like us to follow up with them. And so we are looking at the specific in the regions, in the communities. Okay, we heard about this new organization that we weren't aware of. We want to follow up back with them. And so we are circling back to do even that more granular follow up, not just kind of pulling out these major themes. some of the things just to share initial impressions. So barrier-wise, I would say across all communities, we're really hearing about the disruption of continuum of care, which I would say is not a surprise to anyone. I see some nodding heads. Specifically, a lot of conversation around limited to access to MOUD and MAT opportunities. We heard again, a really common thread, lack of basic needs, transportation and housing. I would say transportation and housing was brought up everywhere and was really heavily discussed. And part of that, as we kind of help tease that out, I think is really due to typically you see other funding opportunities not allowing for those, or, you know, it's a little bit harder to actually be able to apply for grant dollars in that area. And also just speaking to the full need of our communities are really interested in how do we help people get to recovery and stay there. And so they identified the housing and transportation as really key pieces, especially obviously in our more rural communities. That was something that they spoke heavily of. And two other things that we had on the barriers that I think very well aware of, workforce shortages, and what does it mean to have a workforce who is ready and able to provide any of the services that Kansans need. And then stigma, of course, came up continuously just across the spectrum in any area of work people were talking about, whether it was being able to do prevention in their community, actually having access to treatment, but then even the recovery piece, stigma was just, again, that through line of, hey, this is something we're still combating and we still need to do better on. Bright spots, we heard so much about community collaborations between organizations and centers, and you could really hear in some of these sessions the way in which the different organizations worked together and really relied on piecing together what their system looked like in their community. We heard a lot about peers being in the workforce and how great that has been, and how there is this really big acknowledgement of, hey, this is not only great because we know that is effective and that is really helpful for someone who is moving through treatment and recovery, but in of itself, the peers who did attend were able to speak to just this greater being able to be part of something and be part of organizational work and be seen in their community. They felt was a really big bright spot, that was something you know, maybe was not seen as much in previous years or even, you know, in past decades. I will just end talking about when we asked them, imagine 16 years from now. We had some really specific great ideas come forth. So this idea of what would it really mean to integrate peers into the workforce across the continuum, and really this desire to see that really fleshed out in a way that not only are they being incorporated and integrated, but that they are seen as the workforce in their own, with their own set of skills and their own qualifications, and ensuring that as we look to the future, our peers are fairly compensated, are getting the training they need, and are just more foundational to the work itself. We heard a lot about the need and the desire for wraparound services in the future. A lot of people envision, I think one of my favorite quotes was the idea of, like, we would love to be on a campus together. We see each other just being able to walk next door. We heard that continuously throughout communities, this idea of the future looks like it's holistic, it's wraparound, it's really just treating that individual, it's all person-centered. And like I said, we'll have a full report, and we'll be able to provide more detailed information once CPPR has done that analysis. I personally found the entire tour really great, really able to identify things that were just really giving hope to people. And it was, to me, that's just the thing, you know, you hear in these communities, in these conversations, listening sessions, that the burden is heavy and the work is hard. But you also organically were able to see people connecting to each other, and even a sharing of information. We left a few sessions where it felt like maybe we were the guest and they were there being like, okay, it was nice to see you guys, you can leave, we're gonna continue talking and connecting. And so that for me was a really joy to see. So like I said, we'll have information specifically about the content, but then Kristen and I are also going to be getting with CPPR to identify who was missing from those sessions, what voices are we still needing, and again, I know the board brought up last time kind of even the geographical locations. This was, again, an initial step of the engagement process, and one of our really bigger steps into collecting information from the communities, and so we will be reviewing and ensuring that moving forward, we're we're mindful of our gaps. We're mindful of the places and the people that the voices weren't heard of. And so other than that, those are our current updates, and I think we will have much more to discuss in May. I don't know if there's any questions.
Thank you. I wanted to, I attended the one in Dodge City, and I don't know if that was indicative. I assume it was. So I'm put a challenge out there, and you touched on who wasn't there. There's quite a few people, you know. For me, that's one of the main goals of this board is to include everybody. And, you know, the primary care physicians, school counselors, law enforcement, therapists, the judicial branch, drug courts, and on and on. You know, this is, and I don't think it's on purpose, but again, people, they need some guidance on how to work together, and that they are, you know, they are connected. You know, so I won't say anybody's name, but so I called a person that I've known for a long time, and she heads up an organization that they have quite a few therapists. They mainly do family counseling and along that line. I said, hey, I just wanted to bring this, listening to your attention. It's funded through our KFAB board, and her response was, well, we don't do any drug counseling anymore. And I knew they had some specific counselors on board, and I go, what percentage of the counseling do you do with families, et cetera, involve drugs or alcohol? And she said, well, all of them. And I thought, well, there you go. But, you know, and I say that not to embarrass her or anything, but just there is such a connection. And if we can't bridge that gap, you know, I think we fail as a unit. I know that there's more conversation about that, but just getting the physical health and, you know, the local hospitals and the physicians and say, you know, this is not isolated. So I put that out there not to discuss, but put that on your round two to try to somehow, some way, even if we have to go to the hospitals or to the physician, you know, act like you're a drug salesman, you know, those people that hang outside of the doctor's office waiting to get 2 minutes with the physician because they're busy. Yeah, but anyway, that's.
Yes, I appreciate that feedback, and that is something that Krista and I have been heavily speaking about. We know that the next piece is meeting people where they're at, and that is a big piece of this SCD ecosystem mapping that I was talking about. So it's not only that we're digging into where are the things happening and who is doing them, but then doing that additional step of talking to them, saying, hey, let's just, like, you know, we're able to see your website, we're able to kind of generally have information, but like being able to survey them, have those specific conversations is a big piece of that where and the who of mapping the ecosystem. And so we're hoping to meet them where they're at and for sure figure out, you know, what are those things that are like, oh, well, that's not necessarily maybe my lane. And it's like, oh, well, are you sure? Like, what does that look like really on your day-to-day and your staff time? And so that is a key piece that moving forward, we're focusing on.
So this is Sandra. I just wanted to share appreciation for how much work that took to go out around and do that. And I can tell from how you presented to us, this just may be your personality anyway, but how you presented to us really gives me hope and encouragement that there is a lot of good stuff going on out there and people who are living the life, either in recovery or not, and their family are engaged in a conversation with us now and with you. And it just reinforces how important it is that we use our funds in a way that supports folks out there in the community, hearkening back to our last conversation. So I appreciate all the work that took, and thank you for sharing that with us.
A lot of people doing a lot of good work out there. How can we make them more aware? You know, I was thinking you might work with local elected officials. You know, I don't know if any attended any of the sessions, but the local state officials, maybe the mayor, city manager, different people, and invite them because they would obviously have a lot of contact in this area. And they just, you don't think about it, you know, having, in, in recovery myself and worked in the field, there's, again, one of our prerogatives has been how do we bring all the stakeholders, and from my experience, about everybody you could almost have considered a stakeholder. So anyway, thank you for the work, and yeah, she is a bubbly person out there in Dodge City. She is. which is great. I like bubbly. Yeah. Thank you. So item 6, I would propose, but certainly open, that we would just table this till our next meeting. We'll know specifically where we're at with our budget. And Chris, basically we're going to fill in the blanks, of how much money do we want to spend and that sort of thing. I don't know if you need any direction from us on other items that we could address today, or?
Not that I can think of, because they'd all be related specifically to the RFPs and the amounts and whatnot too. So I think if we're tabling that, I think we can wait on any of those pieces too.
Table number 6.
Mr. Chair, if you could just take a motion to table, I would
Okay.
just,
Look for a
proprieties.
motion to table number 6. Sarah moves, and Mike seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye? Same sign? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And for those who are interested, since I caught it, the appropriations meeting that we discussed earlier was on March 7th. And the discussion on the full circle matter was around the 27-minute mark.
And those are accessible. I don't know exactly how you do that. But
Can you remind me again which committee? Because I don't look up the wrong one.
House Appropriations.
Thank you.
thanks, Robert. Any update on the education piece? We had talked about developing a plan for disseminating information to our cities and counties, so still working on that.
Yeah, not from my point, maybe Chris. I've been focused mostly on the RFPs and then these conferences and whatnot since our last meeting, so I haven't made much progress on my end on working on a draft guidance document, but I don't know if maybe Mike or Chris might have other updates.
I can give a quick update. We are not much closer. I've been spending the last month working on the legislature portion of this. But I do think we're still likely on track for a mid to late summer release of some additional information for our cities and counties to be able to better utilize the dollars. The other aspect of this is that we, at some point later this year, want to work with ORN to we can't use their resources or give them money to use their resources since they don't have any available dollars, but potentially find speakers and things like that to set up likely virtual training sessions for cities and counties across the state.
No, another tongue-in-cheek comment is once we develop this education, we could provide it to the legislative committees.
Whoa, parting shot. Well, thank you for that. And again, a reminder, next Friday at 8:42. Yeah. We'll get together via WebEx, and if you have suggestions for a specific statement or just items that you would like to be included, just forward those to Krista. Krista, if you get kind of a theme, if you'd want to send that out, work with Connie to send that out to us to review, and then we'll come up with a statement to submit to the legislature and to the executive branch. Also, if you can look online to see who you're represented by, both in the Senate and the House, and those would be prime targets for, at least a phone or a personal visit. In particular, if they're on the Appropriations or Senate Ways and Means Committee, I'll reach out to the governor's office and give them kind of a heads up that a statement's going to be coming from our board and what that's about. Any other comments?
Just a question of clarification about rules. There's nothing that prevents us from saying we're reaching out on behalf of our role on the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board, right?
You can speak to them in your capacity as a board member, just don't say that you're presenting a full view of the board, as there's no formal statement approved or anything like
Right,
that.
thank you.
And this may go without saying, or this is Mike, I will be reaching out today to the Kansas Association of Counties, which is the organization that appointed me to this board. I think a lot of us, the organization or agency that appointed us to this board, they have their own interests, they have their own lobbyists, and I'm sure many of you feel the way I do, that it's my duty to communicate this development to them, so.
All right, well, everybody have a great weekend. We will adjourn the meeting and see you next Friday.